So welcome. This is effectively episode 7 of the solo Runebearer experiment. You'll notice my my face is up here, and that's because we're not going to play. I will have to mark that in the title to make sure that you know this is sort of metagaming. We finished the first adventure, minus the cleanup. There will be a cleanup episode here coming up next, where we figure out where the characters are financially and what they're going to do next and give them experience and roll all that and then get ready to set up the next adventure. That will be episode 8. And what I wanted to do in episode 7 here was talk very specific, just about how everything sort of got made, since I did indicate that we would have kind of this kind of session here so that people could follow along, recreate this if you wanted to. Right. I don't know if it's worth it. That's, we'll do it once for sure. And then I'm going to rely on some feedback to determine whether people go, yeah, do this after every adventure, or if you tell me, no, we're good, you don't need to worry about it. We get the gist, because it's not that hard. We did talk about some of this, actually. If you watched the Friday night gaming chat that we just had, Scott and I did actually, he's like, oh yeah, I'd love to see like behind the scenes sort of how you did all of it. And I'm like, yeah, it's underwhelming. And this might be underwhelming as well. So buckle in for some disappointment. um, so yeah, let's talk about how we created the adventure and how we did the solo play. So the first thing, and I think we went over most of these concepts in session 0, so bear with me. But I think my concepts, after watching a bunch of solo plays, I think what struck me was I want really simple oracles, yes, no oracles, and then maybe a little bit of a how good, how bad, sort of a strength check, right? Or how strong or weak, or right. And we do this simply by a d12 where we pick an arbitrary number to say yes, no. And that doesn't have to be 50-50. We did some 50-50 rolls, 1 to 6, 7 to 12, but we also did, on a 10, 11, or 12, this will happen. On a, right? I think we do a simple yes, no oracle. And then for how good, how bad, we roll 2 dice, subtract one from the other. That gives you a bell curve centered around 0. And you can then go, oh, okay, interesting. And you could easily do that for a 50-50 yes, no if you wanted to as well, if you needed a strong yes, weak yes kind of concept also. Given that, the adventure itself, so one thing I wanted to avoid was sort of some stuff I saw with people using Mythic and some stuff I saw with people using Solo Dark. I felt that a lot of those adventures seemed very random, even if they were guided by sort of scenes. The individual, like what happened in the scenes, always felt a little bit arbitrary and random, which of course you're trying to discern, right? You're trying to do. I'm gonna adjust my am I centered? Okay, maybe, I don't know. How's it now? How about now? Since you're trying to interpret the words, then you just get, I feel sometimes, a very arbitrary sort of sequence of events, right? Oh, so we were, going down the hallway, and all of a sudden, oh, there's a gigantic noise because I rolled, the 2d100 in Shadow, Solo Dark or whatever, and I just felt it felt a little arbitrary and a little random, and so I wanted to avoid that, and that also drove me to simple oracles, yes, no, have a little bit of a plan. So the adventure was X% planned, and I don't know what that percentage is. You can judge as I go over it, but it was X% planned with moments of arbitrary randomness where we would then change the direction of the adventure. And something random in step 1 could affect something in step 3, and so on. So we have to be, and so we just have to pay attention to that and note where that might happen, and but allow us, to have different branches based on the random events, but not to have arbitrary random events be the backbone of the adventure. The backbone of the adventure, we know, it really comes down to sort of paths. And in some cases, that means we're going to get around to what I think we're going to get around to. It's just how do we get there? And in some cases, it's I'm not exactly sure where we're going, but we're going to one of these 5 places, right? So there's a little bit of, I'm going to say, not branching, a little bit of railroading with a semblance of randomness and choice, and then there's the branching paths, and those are the 2 things that you'll see in here, I think, as we go over how the adventure is structured. And I'll try to point that out when it comes, right. But I need sufficient randomness, because otherwise it's not interesting to me. I want to be interested in this as well, so I can't write the entire thing front to back. I've got to write it such that there are places where I actually don't know what's going to happen, and that's going to give me the surprise on my end that I'm going to need to keep this going. So every so often we roll on tables to jostle the narrative, and either we bring it back to on rails, or we have branching paths, and that's sort of how it goes. So we'll, and then of course the whole thing needs to make sense. Like I very, very much, as a GM, as a player, as a watcher of movies, whatever, I want the thing to make sense. If I don't feel it makes sense, I'm not going to be very satisfied with the ending. If I feel, and there might be a little bit where you go, yeah, I get it. That maybe that's a loose end that we didn't explain, and I'm okay with that. What I don't want is simply the feeling that, oh, and then this happened. Oh, and then this happened. I don't want the adventure to be an arbitrary sequence of events that really don't make much sense, aside from the fact that we are playing it in the game. So those are the concepts, right? That drove the whole thing. And the funny part is, to be quite honest with you, I did not plan this game very differently than I would plan a tabletop game. So if I'm playing with other people, the planning stage is strangely the same. Because I also want the same level of slightly random and slightly unpredictable and so on that I got here. With the and the difference being is that playing solo on video, I could pause the video, walk away for an hour, come back and figure things out. At the table, I have to be a little bit more careful because I am sitting there in front of people. So strangely enough, this was less improv than my normal game. So weird. I didn't really think of that until just now. So I mean, the first thing we did was, of course, set the scene. And, that was the tavern scene. And by set the scene, I don't mean set the scene, do the picture, which is what I did here. Although I do like this picture. Like, there's a lot of 1600 paintings about tavern stuff. So I was like, oh, that's sort of cool. And they're all in the public domain, so yay. And I've decided, by the way, I did decide, I originally said, I'd be okay using some AI, and I did indeed have a couple AI images. I might not, though. I read a rant on Reddit, and it's just I understand as a computer programmer, I understand sort of the the feeling of upset, the distraught feelings that artists must be having, right? To be told simply that, well, we can commoditize your entire industry, your entire trade, and just turn it over to computers. you know what? That sort of pisses me off as a as a coder, and frankly, by the way, totally reveals a fundamental misunderstanding that some folks have with what it is that I do for a living. Um, and I get it. AI coding tools are actually getting better, and indeed, there probably will be a day where I am absolutely not needed, but I feel that I will be retired and or dead by then. Um, and though you can recreate art via AI, it is absolutely true that those models were trained off of actual copyrighted images more than likely, and so one would not exist without the other. The AI would not exist. It cannot create in a vacuum. And I just understand the frustration. And so I think I've decided to not use any AI in any of the videos. So that was a long way to say I think we've backtracked on that, even though it's only quote unquote for personal use. The answer is people are pissed. I feel that they are justified. Let's just not do it, and we can. If it means less art, it means less art. If it, and so be it. So setting the scene. I'm sorry. So anyway, back to setting the scene. So setting the scene. So for the tavern, and that was sort of the first sort of piece of randomness that we had, and so I'm showing you the table now. So the fact of the matter is, we were absolutely going into the basement. The premise of the adventure was indeed get thee to a basement, pretty much, right? We were going to do rats in the basement. That was the premise. Now, I can imagine some weird confluence of roles and goofiness that doesn't take me to the basement, but I was pretty sure we were going into the basement and finding the rats. Pretty sure, right? However, my take on it was, well, let's make that a little bit of a question of how we get in there. We're not planning it as much as we are falling into it a little bit and seeing. So that was my first bit of randomness. The first bit of randomness is we rolled 3 times on this table here. And so we got the priestess, right? So we got the priestess, we got the grunge, and we got the nobleman. And with those 3 choices that came up from the dice, we were going to then ad hoc improv a narrative. Now we had some ideas about some things. For instance, if the ruffians appeared, then you could probably easily justify or walk us into a situation where we were in a fight with them and broke some stuff, and as restitution, the innkeeper, right, wants us, we either go to the stocks or we help him out with his problem, something like that, right? But those interactions, we absolutely did not sort of have the interactions necessarily in mind. We did write some ideas, and a lot of this really comes down to writing some ideas at what possibly could happen. And the funny part is, and I'm showing you, so I'm pulling the curtain back. As the writer of all this, not only did I know what happened, I also knew what didn't happen. So, for instance, we missed out on having the maid show up, and we could have had a third character, or the bard. We missed out on the authorities posting up bounties. And some of this has nothing to do with the rats in the basement. Some of it has to do with the next adventure or, some next possibilities. Same thing. We had an adventuring party, and you could have had an adventuring party come in and had been either totally half wiped out or been super successful and have rumors about a location for us to then explore later. And so all of that was on the table. We had 3D10 to roll. And we did, and it didn't turn out. None of it turned out. So I'm not going to say that sucks. I'm glad how it did turn out, because I thought the family of grunge was interesting. It allowed me to lore dump a little bit to you about the grunge and their sort of unfortunate place on the outskirts of Bostonian society. The noble there with the grunge there was a perfect, almost a perfect reason for the innkeeper to be really, really frantic about this whole thing. The priestess and the aspirants, I called them aspirants, not acolytes, because they're really, yeah, so I will put aspirants. Because they're aspiring to become learned sisters. Again, more chance to lore dump, and I do love a good lore dump. And and a little bit of extra healing, sort of in the back in the kitchen when the heroes would return. And I thought all that worked out really well. We really could have had a lot of other things go on and happen. And it didn't, but again, what happened? But it makes it better, because again, the randomness sort of feels good to me. And I thought it worked out. I did think it made perfect sense, right? The innkeeper sends the boy down to get the garbage for the grunge, to get them out of there, to keep the noble happy. But when the boy gets bitten down in the basement from the giant rats, they whisper to the servants of Estra, because they know that they're probably at least medics, if not healers or doctors. And then that, bam, immediately sets Martin off. And we're done, and we're in the basement. So this is a case where we were using effectively a wide railroad, in that there's a lot of things that could happen, but ultimately it's all coming back together. So we have this, it's almost like, it's no matter what happens, you are going to get here. It's just the journey. How do you get there? Right. And, that's a great tactic. I feel like we can keep the adventure on a path if we want to, but still have lots of possible sort of options in there. If the authorities show up, if the adventuring party shows up, the merchant shows up, those are all different discussions being had. Those are all different things that pop up in the game, and different characters and different stuff and different, again, you could have had a third character. You could have had different, right? But you didn't. But ultimately, all of those things led to the basement. And it does have a and the nice thing is, and even though, like I said, it doesn't, this scene didn't have any ramifications for the overall getting to the resolution, getting to down to the basement. What it does do is it has ramifications for the rest of the campaign. We didn't meet the adventuring party, and thus didn't get the rumor. We don't have Ren in our party, and Ren had another adventure I sort of had in mind for the next thing. And so maybe we do meet one of these folks again as we go. I don't know yet. But and that's another technique, right? The other technique is, well, none of these have to go away. The authorities, but after we're done doing a thing and we go, and the authorities could come by and tack the bounties up on the wall. And then all of a sudden we have that adventure to us. So, and don't get me wrong, that's sort of that's the bad part about showing you the whole thing, is simply it might make that less magical. You now know, oh, well, he wrote that down like 6 months ago. Right? You know what I mean? The illusion here is that everything is dynamic and happening, and I'm somehow running this giant simulation in my head. And in reality, I'm not running a giant simulation in my head. I am writing down a lot of things as I go, and half of the things don't appear. And so you don't know that they didn't appear. So that when I go back to my notes and go, well, why don't we pull these authorities up and they'll tack a bounty? Or why don't I pull an adventuring party that's returned from a nearby sortie into a site and they got their butts kicked? You think that is somehow dynamic. What's really happening is I'm simply pulling off of my list and going, well, what haven't I used yet? And we'll keep adding to the list all the time, of course, and we'll keep pulling off the list all the time, of course. And we are going to do that. And that's how pretty much every campaign, in my opinion, in my games tend to run, is largely I'm just continuously making. And again, it's going to be. I'm almost. I am I giving away like magic secrets? Is like our GM's going to like come hunt me down to tell me to stop it? I'm like the masked magician or whatever. Because again, what I'll also do is I'm going to write down all the names that I mentioned, and I have Simon and I have Callum, and if something comes up and I need to trace, I wanted to trace back, I'm going to pick those names. And we didn't have a lot, but Matron Mary, that's a contact now, like that kind of thing, right? So anyway, so that's the first scene, and that's sort of how we managed that and pulled that forward. And so we finally got you guys to the dungeon, or our guys, the guys. We got our collective guys. This is it. This is the entire dungeon. The entire dungeon is 4 rooms and maybe a couple side passages. Now, I literally just drew this on Dungeon Scroll in like 2 minutes, and thought, good enough. We can go with that. And well, yeah, and that's it. You got 4 rooms. And the structure of the dungeon was literally, here we go. Rats. Here, let's up the font. All right. The structure of the dungeon was rats. Don't know yet. Don't know yet. Boss. That was it. That was the structure of the dungeon. The structure of the dungeon was rats. So we're going to start with a fight. We're going to have 2 absolutely randomized encounters of some sort, which is going to get us something or another. We don't know what that is yet. And then the boss. And these random rolls, so we actually have these. Hold on. So here are the random rolls. The middle room is variable. The middle rooms is variable. And so the middle room, so the first room is 5 giant rats. That was the big fight. Strangely enough, that fight was the big fight, and the boss, of course. So the middle rooms were randomized. Theoretically, some parts of the middle rooms may or may not have said to me, oh, the boss has to be this, or the boss has to have this certain thing. So for instance, we had the Rat King and the Rat Queen, or I called him the Rat Knave, and the Rat Knave would be a human who led like whatever, some, right, who was summoning the rats or was a cult leader or whatever. And so and the roles that we ended up with were these 2 roles. 2 and 3. Those are the 2 rooms we actually got, were these 2 rooms. The rest of the rooms, not seen. And we did sort of use this one anyway, because of the way everything turned out. We did use this, but you had giant rats licking up and slurping up a puddle of goo. That would have essentially meant that the boss was the Rat Queen, but she could spit acid. That's what that was going to mean. Done. Everything sort of had a little bit of the 2 tiny crude crown meant Rat King. Plain old normal Rat King though. So we got the pile of small bones, 1d3 plus 1 rats. You get some baubles and ornamental stones, and they're worshipping, and that's just supposed to be creepy and a little bit awkward, and sort of put the the air of mystery into the air, but not really mean anything. When I rolled this one, that's when I gave the oh my, because I was like, I got to explain that now. Like, there's a whole thing now. Whereas you could have easily had any of the other rolls. That number 2 was sort of the one where I said, that's going to be a lot of work. I'll put it in here anyway, and we'll see what happens. And so I put it in there, and it was a lot of work, by the way. but um, but again, you'll notice the last sentence. But it's something sinister going on here, and so as soon as I rolled that, I had to stop. I stopped the game, which was about an hour anyway, because I was like, well, I need to figure out what this means, because it has ramifications for the cave. It has ramifications for the whole thing, the boss. It has ramifications for the town, the village around the inn. So we need to figure this out. So I stopped, which it was about time to stop anyway, and sat down and said, well, why is this kid down here? It could have been. And so it was literally 50-50. There was a cult. So I love, there was a D&D adventure. I forget the number of it. Was it N1 or I don't know, but it was against the cult of the reptile god. And the cult of the reptile god was you went to this village and realized that everyone was in on the cult. Like the whole village was the cult. And so I thought, well, that could be neat. Or it could just be like one or two of these guys in it, or everybody. And so, but again, we said, well, what's the chance? And so on a 1 or 2, the kid just ends up there by accident. He falls into a sinkhole, ends up down there. The rats chase him around. Scary, right? That whole thing. We rolled number 3. And number 3 meant there was no cult, but somehow the boss is the Rat King for sure. And somehow the Rat King has the ability to use illusions to grab something from your memories. Like he has some magical powers, like a will-o-wisp draws you to your death. The Rat King can also draw you to your death as well. And so we had to figure that out. But by far, that was the 50. I rolled one of the easier choices, sort of. Having said that, I need to then explain why the Rat King exists and why he has illusion powers and so on. And so that's where you get sort of the wacky ending of the whole thing. 4, 5, and 6 would have been a cult sort of situation where there was something bigger going on, and the heroes might have been captured by the cult at some point, or dragged out to the cult's secret sacrificey place, and so on. And maybe that would have even been more interesting than what happened. Don't get me wrong. But again, I'm pretty committed to trying to roll with the dice and just going, yep, we're going to take what the dice give us. Bam. But by that time, once we rolled, so once I rolled that 2, I had to make that new table. That table didn't exist. I had to go and think about all the options, write them down. I did. Once I rolled that 3, I knew it was the Rat King. The Rat King was magical illusions. I'd sort of made the decision in my head that he was going to be a summon of something, like some kind of spirit that is effectively summoned by someone for some nefarious purpose. And that guy was dead now. And that led to the whole Sir Plippy story, because the Rat King pulls Sir Plippy out of Callum the child's head and makes that up. But we then peeked into what the final encounter was going to be, as Callum explained his experience down in the tunnels. But by then, there you go. The path was set right at that point. And the Rat King was a nasty boss. So again, we had the creatures. The Rat King, I had changed it because originally I didn't have any of these powers. Or these powers. But the Rat King was sort of nasty. 90 hit points is a lot of hit points to chew through. Like, that's, for 2 people especially, that's a lot of points to chew through. If you think about that, that means that Rourke is hitting for 10 rounds, this thing, probably, or 9 rounds. That's just a lot of rounds. Like, that's a long combat. And so So, I mean, if you have 3 characters, not as bad. If you have a party, that's not as bad. If you have 2 characters, one of which is a terrible combatant, um, then I think you have a little bit of a problem. And the Rat King was a little bit of a problem. Now, uh, I decided at that. So let's talk for now. Let's get rid of this for now and this, and let's just talk about the elephant in the room, which is combat. So I like combat. I'm a big fan of combat. The whole game, in my opinion, is a fun story around a hardcore tactical man-to-man fantasy war game. Now, there's a couple problems with that. One problem is finding the correct balance. So if you have a game with a lot of combat, it's very possible that real bad shit could happen really early because Runebearer combat is swingy. It has a heavy random element. The idea is that if you go into a fight, it is just very possible that something untoward happens to you and you get downed very quickly. And so it was very important for me to find the balance of the fight. To do that, I did do a test combat ahead of time off camera. And I sat down and I put the characters down. I put the rats down. I said, okay, 5 rats, 2 guys. What the hell happens? And without any specific tactics or without any specific thought to it, I did all that. And frankly, the characters got chewed up really bad. Like, they won, but they would not have continued. Like, I would have pulled them out at that point. And the reason is because Runebearer is fairly punishing to being outnumbered. And it's, and Martin is a shitty combatant, frankly. So you have Martin's not a great combatant. Runebearer itself is punishing 5-2, is a very punishing amount of people. Because then you're literally attacking Rorik 3 times, or maybe 4 times, or you're attacking Martin 2 or 3 times. And their defenses just can't hold up. And so the characters got chewed pretty hard, and it went pretty badly. And I realized, I need to be super careful with how to do those fights. I cannot just plow the players into the middle of the room and fight the 5 rats and hope that they prevail, because that's going to take a lot of luck, and it is just as likely that that luck goes against them, and a couple of these rats get auto wounds or something like that against them and just cut them down. So that sort of it informed how I was going to fight for Martin and Rorik. And the other thing, frankly, that I did, to be quite honest with you, again, full transparency, is where is it? I downgraded the basic rat by 1 point. So this was 8 and 10 to start. I reduced that to 7 and 9. And in fact, well, it was 7 and 9, and then I put a 7, right? If you attack rats twice, you get a bonus there. And that's largely something that Martin could latch on to. He could wait for Rorik to attack something that he could attack, and he would have a degraded, the rats would have a degraded defense. The rats aren't resilient. They're easy to kill, and Rorik did, in fact, kill a bunch and got lucky on the first fight, if I recall, and beat the heck out of the first rat. But reducing that attack to 7, that 1 point, really meant that Martin had a much better capability to go and stand toe-to-toe to a rat or 2 without just folding. And Rorik had even more capability. And it worked out very well. So it was good test combat to sort of feel it out. And I do think, actually, that I did find a good balance. Those fights were actually reasonably interesting, even though, that first one was good. I think they all sort of worked fairly well. Excuse me, goodness. The other thing with combat, and the other problem with combat, is simply, how much is too much combat? Now, keep in mind, we sort of we sort of ran afoul of random number generation, because if you'll notice, there's 4. The first fight was 2 to 8 giant rats. We got 5. We had 4 giant rats in this room, and then 1d3 plus 1 in this room. We didn't get any of the rooms that didn't have a fight. There were 3 rooms with no fight, 1 room with 1 rat. You know, the rooms were trivial or no fights. We didn't get any of those. We got all the fights. We got all the real, like, we got all the things. So that's just sort of how that worked out. And, you know, don't get me wrong, with 50-50, there's a 25% chance you get 2 big fights in the middle. We did. That's sort of how it went. I did not necessarily expect that, obviously, but I know enough statistics to realize that that was certainly a possibility. And I understand that, you know, combat is, like, some people don't watch these for the combat at all. I have seen ones where they don't even, I've seen solo RPGs where they don't even really fight that much. They just, you know, resolve it in a couple rolls and move on with the story. And I totally get that. I don't know that I'm going to do anything differently. I don't know that that's not this channel. I don't think that's not why I'm playing. I am sort of playing to engage with all the mechanics, the spellcasting, the alchemy, the herbalism, the fighting. And so I really don't know that I'm going to have less fighting. I do understand, though. Felix told me in one of the chats that he said, well, one of the problems is I'm listening to it, and it's hard to follow if I'm just listening. And I go, that's a very good point. I don't know. Maybe I can do something for you at that point and work that out. I do feel sort of bad, and this is just whining now. You could fast forward a minute and you'd be fine. This is just whining now. I do feel bad that, like, the first one of these got 1,000 views, then it falls off to like 300, 350 kind of, and then it falls off to 100, and then it falls off to 50, right? So there's a pretty big ramp down from the top. So obviously a bunch of people showed up for one and it hit the algorithm, but a bunch of people didn't stay. Those of you that did, I really appreciate it. We did get 30 followers, maybe 30 subscribers, maybe a couple more. And so I do appreciate that quite a bit. But obviously there is something that we should pay attention to. We should pay attention to as we go forward. I'm going to pause. I'm going to grab a drink, and I'm going to be back. So where were we before I started choking? Yeah, combat. Probably going to have it. It is a central feature of the game. I will do my best to make sure that the episodes are as enjoyable for everybody as they possibly can be. And don't know. We'll have to work on what that means. And I don't know what that means yet. So you can tell me if you thought it was too much, please, or tell me if you thought it was fine. If you enjoyed the combat, a couple people did mention they thought the combat system was pretty cool, and I appreciate that because, I mean, we like it. I like it. And we can talk about more in depth and how it got the way it is over the course of time. So what else do we have? A couple more things. So mistakes. I have that listed here. I did make a few mistakes. I did confuse our two heroes' names a little bit here during the first episodes. You know, calling Martin Rourke and so on. Sorry, I apologize. We'll have to figure. You know, again, you'll have to bear with me on that. Same thing. Even did some math wrong on the first, even the first session. Even when it came to, usually that gets corrected in an episode or so. And I was terrible at recording experience checks. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually print the characters out and have them in front of me. And again, part of that is simply the pain in the butt of going from the map to the characters to my notes, to the game notes, and so on. Like there's just a lot of Word documents open on my sheet, on my screen. So I think I will have the character sheets on here. Now I will keep them on screen, so you will still be able to see them. But I will mark like things like experience and so on the sheet, so that it is a little easier for me to just engage with the sheet. That was the biggest mistake, was experience checks, by the way. Either marking a wrong one or not marking it, and then having to go back later and figure out, oh, did I do a sneak check, or did I write that kind of thing? Yeah, another thing which is sort of interesting, I'll put that in air quotes, interesting to me, and sort of wonky, which I really hadn't thought of, because again, Boston, this all has never been out the door, as it were, and like never been a public thing. But Bostonia, as it stands in today's sort of internet culture, is very problematic, right? It's very clunky. It's a clunky society. It is a clunky pseudo medieval fantasy society. There's lots of topics and themes that are not really kosher today in sort of the modern RPG, YouTube, internet scene, right? Misogyny, the relationship between the church and the temple is tenuous at best, even though they're two halves of the same mythos. So I mean, the myth is that the father punished the ancients for turning their back on him and the mother, and so he unleashed the fire seeds to cleanse the earth. The mother saved the faithful of humanity by taking them into the sea or into the water, and the fire seeds did cleanse the earth, and then 1,000 years later people rise from the water. That's sort of the mythos. But the church today is all men, the temple today is all women, and those two don't necessarily get along. There literally is an entire arm of priestesses that are the archer priestesses, whose primary unspoken job is to make sure that there is an effective deterrent against their own religious brethren. So I mean, there is sort of this underlying, again, misogyny between, and that's just something that is inherent to the world. The Bostonians are xenophobic a little bit, so though there are Baraki and Cobrat, and we'll meet those later, and some goblins and grunge. They do not treat them particularly well, and they do indeed feel that Bostonians do indeed feel that humanity is the chosen of the gods. And there are a lot of manifest destinies sort of concepts in the Bostonian, psyche. But a lot of that is so that's just something I don't know whether anyone cares. I don't, and I don't feel like we're not going to change any of that. That is sort of how that's how the universe is in this game universe. And the players can engage with that in all kinds of ways, and the characters might engage with it in different ways. And Martin's a noble, so he was brought up with all of those traditional values, as it were. And so that's just something that we'll have to see how it goes in the game. Now, again, I don't, the caveat is I don't necessarily condone any of that, but it's in the world. Like that's how that works. So, right, the good guys have to have bad things to deal with so that they can be good, I think. So anyway, so that's just something I thought of, which was sort of interesting. What else do we have here? So, okay, the final battle. So once we had determined what the Rat King was and that he had illusion powers and so on. I did want something in that last fight to be different than just a slog through 90 hit points. And so I thought, well, wouldn't it be great to have some kind of test, right? The idea would be, which we will get to, it's a little bit of a spoiler. You know, the dude, the Piper, the guy that summoned the Rat King, why do you summon him? To know something. The Rat King knows something. You have to get that information from him by feeding him, or you have to get it by challenging him to a battle of wits and winning. That's sort of how that works, and that's why he was summoned. And the fact that he died and broke the circle was the reason why all the badness was happening in the basement. And so by getting rid of the Rat King, the badness goes away in the basement because his magic no longer holds sway over this underworld that was created. Done. That's the idea. That's the explanation. Sorry if that's a spoiler. I don't think it's a super spoiler. They will, you know, but they haven't gone through the guy's pockets yet, effectively, right? The problem is that most of the tests of wit, right? So that's a great idea, right? Martin then engages with the challenge that the Piper was going to have with the Rat King, and he's witty. He's the smart one of the two. His wit's 14 or 15 or something. I think it's 15. Like he's actually, that's his best stat. Yeah, he's with 15. He's a clever boy, Martin. And that's great. So how do you do that? Well, a wit test would be just a die roll. Martin and his wit versus the Rat King and his wit, and you roll the dice. Done. And that's great, but that's super unsatisfying for a video. There was a lot of going on there. I apologize for that. But that's sort of dull. I mean, that's 10 seconds I roll, and yay, Martin wins. Or he loses, and then the battle continues. So you really didn't do anything there. You didn't change anything. I thought, well, what about a puzzle? I'm like, well, okay. So someone's going to watch me solve a puzzle on video for... I could not find a good test of wits between the Rat King and Martin that did not effectively involve me just rolling a die or screwing around with something that is sort of pointless. You know, like it was something that was just unfun for a solo game, unfun for video, and so on. Right? I could do a riddle. You can't riddle yourself. Like, how do you riddle yourself? So that's when I was like, well, maybe I can do a board game, quote unquote, like a tavern game. And though that seems rather arbitrary and a little bit dumb, and I admit I think I was a little bit dumb, but at least it is a game. And if there's a little bit of random to it, which there's a lot of random in the game that I chose, then you have this situation where you were sort of figuring out what's what. And ultimately, frankly, you know, had Martin lost, then we resume the combat and Rorik might be out of his mez, and the players then probably win that fight still, and so on. And we just elongated it, so maybe that was a bad choice. But Martin didn't. Actually, got really lucky with him, and so he won. And I might have made one or two bad moves for the Rat King. I hope that I didn't, because my intent was not for Martin to necessarily win that. But there were a couple times when I was like, I don't know if that was the best move. Don't know. But Martin ultimately, again, I think that game turns if I just roll like a 1 or 2 instead of a 5 or 6 in some cases for Martin. So I didn't hate it. Now, the reason I chose that game very specifically, and this is the stupidest reason ever, and you should all make fun of me, is it allowed me to use the pun 5 mice. Because the game's called 5 dice, but the Rat King called it 5 mice. That was it. That's literally the reason I chose that game. That was it. That's the whole... And I, frankly, am so happy and proud of that. You should all be groaning. Um, that was the final battle. So good and bad. Good, I thought the combats were fun and well balanced. I did think that is true, even if there were too many of them. But I thought they were fun. I thought they were well balanced. I am pleased with the choices I made for the monsters and the creatures. Same thing with the brute. Like the brute was the rat queen, just toned down a little bit. Because I said, well, I'm not going to use the rat queen, and that's too bad. Let me tweak her stats, and then I'll use that as the brute. I thought that was pretty fun. That was a good battle. The 5 rats in the first room was a great battle. So I thought the combats were fun and well balanced. That is a pro. That was a good thing right there. Another good thing, I thought it was overall fun. I thought the adventure was fairly compelling. Like, I enjoyed it quite a bit. I thought the random bits that we did worked out really well in that, again, I knew where we were going approximately, but there were a couple places where I'm like, well, I didn't see that coming. So no, let me regroup and figure out what that means. And I think I need that for the game to work. So I thought that worked out really well too. And I thought the whole thing ended up being reasonably compelling. So I had quite a bit of fun. I think the bad was simply there's a little bit of mistakes. There's a little bit of organizational problem running with all the Word documents out and so on that sort of caught up with me. And so I was not doing a good job of marking things as I needed to mark them. So I need to find some way to better manage that and to better organize my desk and the desktop. I think that's a thing. Being that there was a lot of combat, that's another potential con of the game that, you might have lost a bunch of people. I might have lost a bunch of potential, folks that would have been more interested or views or people that would be interested, but still just are like, dude, that's just, there's 4 combats in a row, that kind of thing. Right. So I think I don't know that I'm going to change that necessarily. We'll see what the next adventure looks like, but you should at least be aware of it and try to make those scenes as interesting as possible, or to cut down on the combat. Figure that out. I do think that the final game was sort of arbitrary. I don't know if that felt arbitrary to folks viewing it. I enjoyed it, and by the way, it is canon that the forces of chaos, the demons, the spirits do often choose to engage humans in gambling games. That is a weird sort of quirk of the spirit world that is one of the ways primarily that it, right, because betting your soul for a bit of power is even more somehow depraved, I think, in the minds of those forces. That's even somehow more depraved than simply signing it over. So it's not out of character that, and frankly, I very may well have ended, if I played this at a table with a couple people, I might have ended it the same way, strangely enough, with a gambling game. So just keep that in mind. But I don't know if it might have seemed arbitrary, right? It might have seemed like, oh, well, you're just doing that to get them out of the fight. And I do admit that I did want it so that it wasn't just a fight. Having said that, had Martin lost that game, it would have just ended up being a fight. So, I don't know what I'm trying to say. Just that I do understand that it may or may not have seemed like an arbitrary choice to have a gambling game in the middle of the boss fight. But there you go. So, did I have a good time? I did. I hope you had a good time. Again, I would ask to, fire some comments. Give me your feedback. I am preparing for the next one of these. You see, I did take quite a bit of notes as we went, so I do have some, And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to get this document. I'm going to finish it. I'm going to put the story of Mr. Plippy on here and the explanation of everything that happened, and then I'm going to post all of this in a solo play public folder on my Google Drive, so that you can have it to see what's going on, what happened. And the only other thing, if anybody has any questions or anything that they want to, for their own solo play of this game or another game, I'm happy to talk about that. That's it. Thank you very much for watching, and I will hopefully see you on the next adventure in episode 8.